Us back on the air with John Clay. He joins us. John, of course, covers Kentucky basketball and Kentucky athletics, has been on with us earlier when the Calipari story popped. John, thanks for your time. What have you heard today, if anything new, or what you are hearing at this time on Scott Drew in Kentucky?
What we're hearing is probably the same thing you guys are hearing. Kentucky has talked to Scott Drew about the job. Not sure if they've made an official offer to Scott Drew, but certainly he is the focus of their attention right now. And we don't expect anything to happen today as far as like any kind of announcement one way or another, but we could hear something tomorrow.
John, what do you think is the sweetener in the deal to get him away from the program he built?
Well, I mean, I think it would probably offer him more money than he makes at Baylor. He'd be coming to a program, obviously, with 8 national championships, with a history of winning, a lot of, fan support, coming to a state where where people care passionately about basketball. Also, I think the fact, as we've talked, I think I talked with you guys about before, he has a prior relationship with Mitch Barnhart, dating back a few years. I think they think along the same lines. I know that Scott's faith is very important to him, and I know Mitch's faith is very important to him. So I think they feel like that they are two people. I think Mitch feels like he could work well with Scott Drew, and I think he feels like Scott could work well with him. And he also feels that he's a very good basketball coach and would do a good job here. Now, I guess it's up to Scott whether he wants to make that move or not.
John, there's obviously been other names rumored. Danny Hurley is somebody that, I mean, if it was the fan choice, he'd probably be the guy that everybody picked, rightfully so, back-to-back national champ. But he kind of seemingly took his name out. I know Billy Donovan, another name mentioned. Do you feel like it's all eyes on Scott Drew right now, or do you think there's still other talks ongoing and Kentucky's still kind of vetting what all is out there for them?
No, I think it's all Scott Drew right now. I think if Scott Drew wants the job, I think there's at least a 90% chance or maybe 100% chance that Scott will be the coach. That doesn't mean that they aren't, talking to other coaches as far as if Scott says no and decides to stay at Baylor, that they, obviously they would have to go in another direction. It's not going to be Danny Hurley. I would be really surprised if it's him. And there were reports last night that Kentucky was going to throw $11 million a year at Danny, but I don't think he's made it pretty clear. He made it clear again today that he has no intention of leaving, that all he's thinking about is a three-peat at Connecticut. Billy Donovan, I thought it was interesting last night. People quizzed Billy. The media talked to Billy about it before the Bulls game, and Billy said all his focus was on the Bulls. He didn't shut the door on going to Kentucky, but he basically said, he even said at one point, "Is Cal left? Is Cal even left yet?" And I think I told you guys before, all the talk I've heard over the last few years is that Billy really had no interest in returning to college basketball, maybe even less so now, considering the way the landscape has changed with the transfer portal and NIL. Nate Oates put out a statement that he's not going anywhere. That's the thing. If Scott Drew says no, he wants to stay at Baylor, we're not sure which direction Kentucky turns after this. There's not an obvious guy after Scott. So, but right now, I think definitely Kentucky's focus is on Scott and whether or not he wants to leave Waco and come to Lexington.
So we've seen a little bit of the, and I say crazy in a positive way, probably most of it, as far as Kentucky basketball fans. Scott Drew had a picture along with Eric Shiro from a local bank, Alliance Bank, one of our sponsors, who's also a huge fan of Scott's and the men's basketball program. And then all of a sudden, allegedly, there might have been a fan or 20,000 who called the restaurant and asked to speak with Scott. You saw that. There's the flight tracker with Scott Drew on the plane. And yet he's in Waco. How much this is typical of why it's such a rabid fan base?
Yeah, I made the joke on Twitter that apparently there are two Scott Drews. One is touring Lexington and one is eating chips and salsa in Waco. So Kentucky might be getting a real bargain if they can get Scott Drew. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of craziness with every coaching search. But Kentucky, you can multiply that by 10 probably. That's always it. I don't know whether I believe the story about somebody trying to figure out the restaurant and calling the restaurant. You hear those kinds of crazy stories. But definitely, I mean, that is the thing. For better or worse at Kentucky, there is a lot of interest in Kentucky about Kentucky basketball. If you come here and you coach here, that you have to deal with that. You're going to be living in a fishbowl. Everybody knows. Everybody wants to know your every move. Everybody wants to criticize your every coaching move. So, I mean, that comes with the territory. If you want to be the coach here, I wrote that column today. This job is not built for everybody. And but from everything I've heard, I think Scott would be able to handle that. I think he's different than Calipari, and you guys know more about this. You can tell me more. He's a different personality from Calipari, which I think is probably a good thing. You don't really want to follow one bombastic coach with another bombastic coach, or one coach who has one style and then have the same exact style with the next coach. So Cal himself said the other day in his video yesterday that Kentucky needs a different voice, and I think Scott Drew would be a different voice. But I also know that Scott, as you guys know, Scott has done a tremendous job there turning around and building that Baylor program. He's got deep ties there. I know he's got just as that picture today, he's got a lot of close friends there in Waco. I'm sure it's a very hard decision for him. And if he does, whichever way he decides to go, I know it's going to be, he's going to have to put a lot of thought into it and make the best decision he thinks is right for himself and his family.
Yeah, you're not going to see bombastic, but you'll see a personality that either remains in Waco or wherever he is, if it's Kentucky, that is so full throttle, like it almost, some people thought initially it wasn't real. And it's as real and genuine as you could possibly be. But don't let that be mistaken that he doesn't want to compete and win and has a burning desire inside of his stomach to do so. So, yeah, but not like that outwardly confidence or arrogance that you might see, whether you think it's Calipari or somebody else.
Right, and you have to. Oh yeah, Kentucky knows he's competitive. He came into Rupp Arena and beat Kentucky. Yeah, I think that was Kentucky's first home loss under Calipari, or one of the first home losses under Calipari. And then Kentucky, you guys may remember, Kentucky went down there to played in Cowboy Stadium, played Baylor down there, not during an ice storm.
Yep.
And Baylor beat them again. Now Kentucky did beat Baylor in 2012 in the NCAA tournament, when Kentucky won the championship. But no, Kentucky's very familiar that Scott Drew is a competitor. The other thing, too, Kentucky, I mean, we're right next door to Indiana. Kentucky knows the Drew family from Indiana, Homer Drew, Bryce Drew, great reputation for what they did in Indiana. They know that's a great basketball family. The Drew family's a great basketball family. So, they know, they already know a lot about Scott Drew from that standpoint. That's for sure.
Well, and they can have any one of those Drews, John. They can have any one of them. John, for Kentucky fans, like, how concerned are you that they have this, Ocean's 11 cast of a coaching search, when if Scott Drew does say no and he stays, that they go to plan B, and that guy is going to be coming in with less hoopla than they would be, but that guy might be the right guy.
Yeah, John Adams, a friend of mine who's a longtime columnist with Knoxville News Sentinel, wrote once, I think is very true. No search is a bad search that hires the right coach. And so I think that, if they do have to go to plan B and they end up coming up with somebody who maybe doesn't have the name recognition or the same resume as a Scott Drew or a Danny Hurley or somebody like that, that doesn't mean they picked the wrong coach. The only thing that, there's not a person, there's not a young up-and-coming guy out there that you would say, okay, here's who Kentucky should have to go after. When Kentucky hired Rick Pitino in 1989, they were on probation, coming off a scandal with Eddie Sutton. Pitino was the young up-and-coming coach, but he had already taken Providence to the Final Four. He was already the coach of the Knicks when they convinced him to leave the Knicks and come to Kentucky. There's really not anybody out there that really fits that bill. Mark Pope has deep Kentucky ties. He played on Pitino's 1996 national championship team. Mark is a great guy, really smart guy, but he's a young coach who doesn't quite have that resume. He's done a really good job at Utah Valley and BYU. I think if he had made a big run with BYU this year in the tournament, he would be more prominently mentioned on Kentucky's list. But after that, there's not really a guy out there. So if Scott Drew does say no, I'm staying in Waco, and I think a lot of people here, I think I would certainly understand that, and I think most fans here, most reasonable fans of Kentucky would understand that. But if he does say no, I'm not sure where Mitch Barnhart turns, to be honest with you.
John, so the seconds are ticking, minutes, hours, whatever. How long before, if you're a Kentucky administrator, Mitch Barnhart, or those who love the program, how long of a wait before they start to get nervous? Because I'm sure Baylor fans feel the same way in the opposite way, that they would like to hear something soon.
Yeah, I don't think from either standpoint, because of the relationship between Mitch and Scott, I think Mitch will give Scott ample time to make the decision. But I think Scott, in deference to Mitch, won't drag this out. I really think we'll know something tomorrow, one way or another. We might even know something. This word might even leak out late tonight. I don't think there'll be any announcement or anything then. But I think it'll. Tomorrow there's a good chance this is all going to wrap up one way or another as far as his candidacy tomorrow. The other thing is, with the transfer portal and everything going on, Kentucky needs to hire somebody quickly, and I'm sure Baylor feels the same way. If Scott Drew is going to leave, they would hate it, but they want it to happen quickly so they can go ahead and get another coach, and then both programs can get to the task of building their roster for next season. Because you can't look on Twitter or look on any of the sites that cover college basketball, and there's just more and more people entering the portal every day. One of the big recruits that Kentucky Calipari had coming in, his father said yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, that he was sticking with Kentucky no matter what Calipari did. And then today, after Calipari's announcement, they announced that, oh well, he's decided to put his name in the portal after all. He's asked to get out of his letter of intent. So I think whether it's Kentucky or Baylor, one of the two is really going to have to be scrambling, trying to put together a roster for next season. So I don't think they want to string that out.
All right. If Scott Drew decides to go to Kentucky, it will be a kick in the you-know-what for Baylor's fan base. No doubt about it, because of what he's meant here and what he's done and what he can still do. What will it be for Kentucky fans with other options, but if he was to say no to them? What would it mean to them?
Well, I think they'd be disappointed. There's some people here that, they were hoping for Danny Hurley, or they were hoping for somebody like that. And people have had to remind them, hey, Scott Drew's done a terrific job there at Baylor, and he's under tough circumstances, and he won the championship a couple of years ago. So I think there would be people be disappointed. But like I said, I think a reasonable Kentucky fan would understand that, as you said, Scott's been there for 20 years. I think he's been loyal to Waco, and his family, and that would be the best decision for him to stay. I think they'd be disappointed, but I think if there is such a thing as a reasonable Kentucky fan, I think they would understand that decision. But I think I think he would be a good choice, especially from the standpoint, like we said earlier, I think he would be that different voice that Cal talked about and have a different style about him that would help this program. So we'll see how it plays out.
Did you ever have a chance to sit down at all, or at press conferences, talk with Scott Drew? And if yes, what was your impression?
I've never sat down with him like one-on-one, but like I said, I've been around him, at press conferences when he was up here when they played at Rupp, that time where he press conference after the game, and then in the NCAA tournament, with press conference. I've always been, impressed with Scott, with the job he's done. He seems to me you guys know him a lot better than I do, a very optimistic, positive guy. I can see why he's a good recruiter because of the message, that he sends. I think another thing, too, that's works in his favor here, Kentucky fans are tired of having teams that are so young year after year and then they're gone. And I think, it looks to me the last few years, especially that championship year, Scott was able to bring in transfers and build a team, build a program. And I think that's what Kentucky fans are looking for. So, and the people that I know who know Scott and who I respect as good basketball people, they have a lot of respect for Scott, for the job he's done there and the kind of person he is.
Just like what you do covering Kentucky and college athletics. John, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your patience on the inconvenience. We appreciate it. Good luck with it moving forward one way or the other, and we'll probably be talking to you again soon.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
John Clay, columnist, Lexington Herald-Leader, covering the Kentucky Wildcats and his side of the story on what's being said there, or what they are expecting, or the story out of Lexington. Also, Keith